Ms. Black.
Thank you, Dr. Farr, and thank Georgetown and especially Jeff for bringing us all together at this really historic time. I mean, this is truly a historic day where a historic decision has been made by our Supreme Court that means historic consequences, not only for our health care, but also for our freedom. And I must say that with this decision today, in my opinion, this is really an affront to our Constitution. And will really forever change that relationship between our government and our people. Because now a decision has been made to say that our government, of which, as Anne Marie said, was here, the Founding Fathers, to protect us from our government now is being very intrusive in our lives to tell us what it is that we may or may not do. Now, of course, beyond that decision, Obamacare, as now it seems that we are going to have it standing, has handed over an immense regulatory power to the Department of Health and Human Services to control just about every aspect of our health care in our country. And as we have seen, some of that unfettered power is being used to force religious organizations to violate their conscience and to pay for insurance plans that cover contraceptives and also abortion-inducing drugs. Now, that HHS mandate is an unprecedented assault on our First Amendment right to religious freedoms. As we have already heard the previous speakers speak about that. And even with the administration's so-called compromise, the president's still placing the health care law above our Constitution and religious freedom. And this is just really totally unacceptable. Last week, like many of you know, Mr. Fortenberry, as he mentioned, and also Dan mentioned, the Catholic Health Association rejected, and rightfully so, the HHS compromise on the mandate and requested more broad exemptions from its requirement that all employers provide coverage of contraceptives and abortion-inducing drugs. Now, the administration has set up really an impossible choice for our religious-affiliated institutions. Either you violate the law or you violate your conscience. And under the president's proposal, employers and employees obviously will still bear the cost of paying for the coverage of contraception and abortion-inducing drugs because the insurance companies obviously will simply pass this cost on. This free service will be passed on with higher premiums to the employer. That we know will happen. Now, obviously, the president supposedly walked back the contraceptive mandate is really a change in his rhetoric and not his policy, as Dan has already said. And it's not, it does not address either the constitutional problems with the mandate or its infringement on our freedom of religion for the American people. Freedom of religion should not be treated as a revocable privilege from our government. It was not set up that way, but instead as an inalienable gift from God, our Creator, as was so aptly said by Anne Marie. And the HHS mandate is yet another example of the president putting his personal political philosophies above the principles that were based upon our Constitution and the founding of our nation. So the public outcry against the HHS mandate has been undeniable. We have seen protesters that have demonstrated at the building outside of HHS and at other places around the nation. To date, we have 56 stakeholders that have filed 23 lawsuits against the administration. Despite this outpouring of objection, the Obama administration recklessly has continued down that path of unjustifiable burdens that burdens our religious and our moral conscience. And some of the Obama administration has sought to divide our opposition. They want us to believe that this is just a Catholic matter with the bishops, and they've even talked about it as being the war on women. But as you can see here today by this panel, because whether you're Catholic or not, and I am not Catholic, we know that our religious organization is being threatened and that we're all threatened by this. And as people of faith, any of us could be next. And I believe we must fight against a government so large and so intrusive that it's entering in our lives in unprecedented ways, ways that if we look back at our founding fathers, they would just never believe that our government could be so intrusive in our lives in so many ways. Now, in March of this year, the Senate Democrats band together against the Republicans to defeat the Respect for the Rights of the Conscience Act. We saw by a 51-48 margin adopted a motion to table or actually kill that act. More than half of our House, so it was a bipartisan, sponsored or co-sponsored the bill that Representative Fortenberry offered. Now, it is really incredibly disappointing that the Supreme Court has decided to uphold this law, in my opinion. One way or another, it is imperative that the rule be rescinded and that the law be repealed in its entirety. And in terms of this HHS mandate, we do have something called the Congressional Review Act that requires only a simple majority to repeal a law. And so come November, hopefully we're going to have some willing partners in both the Senate and the White House so that we can move forward and share our commitment to upholding the Constitution and protecting religious freedom by striking down this most onerous rule. I believe it's important to keep in mind that whether or not the HHS mandate is front and center in the news, that the fact remains the HHS mandate infringes on our religious beliefs. And as people of faith and as Americans who respect our Constitution, we must continue to hold the administrator's feet to the fire and demand a repeal of this contraception rule. Sadly, the HHS mandate is really just one of so many ways that this law erodes our liberties. And I didn't bring the law with me, but if we had it sitting on the table, it is about this thick. It gives so many of the future decisions to HHS and whoever the secretary is in deciding what other freedoms can be taken away from us by the administration and not by Congress, where Congress, you have the right, you have the ability to address Congress. You do not have the ability to address the executive branch. I will continue, as I have for the past year and a half, to get this law off the books and ensure that our federal government doesn't say how Americans practice their religious convictions. And again, I thank all of you for being here, and I thank those who helped to put this together.
Thank you, Ms. Black, and thanks to all of our panelists.